Today, I'd like to talk about Pluto transiting the planets. In general, Pluto rules our energetic resources. But then Pluto gives us the desire to transform through experiences in our physical lives and also on a psychological and emotional level. The point of this is our energies, what it is that we are vibrating at energetically, that is a match for what we are bringing into our lives. And Pluto's job is to help us to transform in some way that will allow us to elevate ourselves energetically so that we attract resources that are in resonance to something that is higher and more conscious in us. When we work with the power of Pluto, can become more empowered in our lives because Pluto supports the death and rebirth cycle of the psyche, and that is forcing us to transform on a psychological level and also an emotional level. But this can happen through something happening on a more physical level. However, although Pluto is very transformative, it can bring intense, violent, harsh, critical situations that are destructive. So it's not an easy planet to work with energetically because it wields the most intense and extreme power of all the planets. So Pluto is regarded as the last invisible planet in the solar system. And here, from our earthly perspective, Pluto is a planet that symbolizes the boundaries between the physical and the non-physical. Even if astronomy says otherwise, from the perspective of astrology, it is obvious that Pluto holds special powers because its impact through transits are undeniable. I just want to add that from a philosophical perspective, that although we believe that we are affected by the planets, the higher truth is that each planet is a representation of us. And ultimately, the planets and us are the same, although we experience them as an external thing. Just like we are our reality. In other words, we are life because life cannot exist without our personal perception of it. Although we experience reality and even astrology as an external thing, it is really all one thing. All we have to do is consider that our reality cannot exist as it is from our personal perspective without us being a part of it. Therefore, everything we experience must come from and through us as the perceiver of the conscious awareness of our reality. So, although we experience these influences as something other than us, as an external thing happening to us, much like how we experience all of reality, the deeper truth is that the planets are an expression of us as we interact with our physical reality. So getting back to Pluto, when we consciously work with Pluto, we can get the most amazing results and transformative results. We can transform at the most superior level in that there is an involution that happens within us where we are able to become more conscious and aware and elevated in our influence in this reality. So, although Pluto brings very difficult situations, it does yield the ultimate results of how we can experience our reality here on Earth. Pluto represents power, money, as well as our passionate desires. It also rules how we are able to heal energetically. Pluto also rules control, and it also rules the magnetic power we can hold in the presence of others. So Pluto is the planet that likes to dig deep, to investigate, to research, is the planet that wants us to get to our deepest inner resources and to excavate that in a way that we can express ourselves in a more authentic and conscious way. Welcome to Starwell Astrology. My name is Sherry. I am a Western tropical astrologer and I specialize in shadow work. If you'd like a personal natal chart reading with me or a one-on-one shadow work coaching session, you can send me an email at starwellastro@gmail.com. Also, if you enjoy this content, please don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Now, the main way to work with Pluto is through shadow work and to become more aware and present to oneself as they experience the powerful influences of Pluto is the work that we can do for ourselves during this period of time. By facing the intensity of Pluto's energy, we can work with this productively instead of destructively. If one is aware enough of themselves, then they might not get completely lost in the powerful impulses or the intense pressure to make extreme or destructive choices. The intense desire to destroy what we have built can feel urgent, especially with squares and oppositions. But if we work consciously with Pluto, we might be able to hold back from being so expressive and double check our choices before we make any harsh decision. But Pluto does have this intense pressure that can take over to the degree that we lose ourselves in it. And we can become explosive and volatile, maybe even cruel if left unchecked. We could even become unhinged during this transit when facing difficult circumstances. So the practice of shadow work can help us to become conscious and aware of how we feel without impulsively reacting while we continue to move through the overwhelming emotional, intense desires of Pluto transits. With enough awareness, we can use this potential to gain higher levels of transformation. And if we can stay aware and sit with the intense urge and allow this to show us what and how to constructively heal or transform the area of life that is affected by Pluto, then we are working consciously with Pluto's influence. Now, for example, if Pluto is influencing the fourth house, we might impulsively want to change our home in some way. We might want to destroy our whole family dynamic, which we may have spent years nurturing. But if we do this destructively and in extreme ways, we might blow up our whole home life without regards for those that we're hurting. But if we're able to sit with this long enough to make conscious choices that are aligned in something that feels more authentic, then we're less likely to hurt those we love and ourselves. Now, if Pluto is affecting the seventh house, which is our relationship house, when it comes to intimate feelings, Pluto can be extremely volatile. It can be jealous and obsessive and uh, destructive. So there might be some sort of pressure to impulsively blow up our relationship. But if we can become more conscious of the intense urge that we feel, we might be able to evaluate the situation more carefully. We can make conscious decisions to transform ourselves through the relationship rather than it becoming more of a blame situation where the other person wasn't able to give you what you thought you needed from them. So with shadow work, again, this allows us to make more conscious choices as we grow and transform on a level that would show us our own values in relationships. Becoming more conscious of the intense urge to react is essential. And if we can wait till Pluto is finished with the aspects that it's making to our planet before making decisions, that would be the best way to work with Pluto, because while we're in the middle of it, it can be overwhelming and very pressurizing. However, if we don't have any window of time to work with, then at least be more conscious and aware of the intense desire to destroy or disrupt our life in some way. And this might at least help us to make a more effective decision. So we can work with Pluto if we try to be aware of the intense pressure we feel to destroy something in our lives. It might really be something that we need to rebuild in some way, but we must do this through higher and more conscious awareness. Also, with Pluto transits, it's best to approach this with the realization that something is about to end in order for transformation or a transition to take place. And if we allow ourselves to release whatever it is that needs to be released, then it makes for a smoother transition. Not saying it won't be painful, but it is a smoother transition or transformation while we're working with Pluto. Pluto transiting the sun in the natal chart. Now, the sun is the sign that represents who we are at our core essence. I've made many videos on this and I've explained how vital our sun is in our natal chart because the sun is our source. It is who we are at our core. It is literally our vitality. The sun is consciousness, and it is how we get to express consciousness as a unique individual, which gives us our sense of self in this reality. The sun in the natal chart is the illuminating point of our physical presence in the world. Therefore, the sun is a pivotal point in our natal chart. So with Pluto conjunct the sun, there is a requirement that we transform in some very significant way. Pluto conjunct the sun is the most transformative and intense planetary combination. Pluto is a sign that requires us that we transition or transform through any means necessary. Unfortunately, changing on this level is not usually easy, so therefore it's usually painful and maybe even unpleasant, at least while we're going through the transitional phase of Pluto making contact with our sun, which will typically last around 3 years. However, as we come out on the other side of this transit, with Pluto contacting our sun, we can feel completely transformed on a much more elevated level. All transits from Pluto to the sun can be challenging in some way, even if it's a trine or sextile. Pluto will still deliver harsh situations that are meant to make us level up in some way. However, with the trine or sextile, it might feel a bit gentler since usually we are already dealing with something difficult and it is now at a critical point where we must face the situation. So with trines and sextiles and sometimes even conjunctions, we might have a better option to allow this transformation to take place. But because we are creatures of habit, this transit might still feel difficult. Most of us don't want to change, and Pluto will demand this of us and will put intense pressure on us to make that change. An example would be if we're dealing with the loss of a parent, and usually this is the father, represented by the sun. The sun also represents father figures in general, as well as any prominent masculine figure in our lives. It also represents our own vitality plus our career. So with this transit, it could mean any of those things. But from the perspective of Pluto trining or sextiling our sun, this might indicate the passing of your father. And although it might be difficult, the circumstances of his suffering due to illness makes his passing a relief in some way, but we'll still mourn his loss. With squares and oppositions and sometimes conjunctions, the transits tend to happen in a much more challenging way. But our complete rejection or resistance to the transformation that is taking place will make it even more unpleasant since we don't want to change and we resist change, especially when we're not the ones making the change and it feels like it's coming from something external. This becomes very uncomfortable. But Pluto will bring very destructive situations into our life to force us through through some type of uncomfortable change. When Pluto is working with our sun sign can be very demanding, and they can shift or transform our level of consciousness or our level of awareness. If we resist or don't feel ready to work with Pluto's intense energy, then this is when we feel ungrounded, and it's very, very uncomfortable and unpleasant, and even worse, it might make us feel disempowered. So who we think we are will be under the microscope, and the pressure from Pluto is felt intensely, where Pluto wants us to own our inner power by facing the intense pressure we feel in order to make the higher and more conscious choice, which usually means we need to stay aligned in Pluto's magnetic pull, but to have higher intentions for ourselves in order to transform. Our unconscious emotional wounds will surface to be healed, but this requires a certain amount of readiness that we're not always prepared for. And shadow work is essential when we're dealing with Pluto in aspects to the sun, because our buried emotional wounds will surface, and they will need to be faced in order to get to the other side of ourselves, which is more authentically aligned in who we are. And Pluto can be a destructive force that is uncompromising. So it is best to work with Pluto by facing ourselves and the intensity of Pluto to heal our wounded emotions. We can also try energy healing work as we go through this very powerful rite of passage. Pluto wants us to transform and integrate all fragmented parts of ourselves. If there is resistance to facing our fears and phobias, such as our wounds, then we might feel helpless. So our way through this transit, especially in a conjunction, is to be with ourselves as we are and to face all the hidden aspects of the self that we may have resisted in the past, because now they're ready for healing. Pluto transiting the moon. This can be difficult because the moon represents our safety and comfort level. The moon is our closest environment, such as our home. The moon also is the filter for our reality, and how we connect to reality through our emotions. And the moon also affects our behavior. So the moon has an emotional component that governs how we express our feelings. And Pluto transits can affect our level of security, and our closest environment, such as our home and family, could feel threatened in some way. Pluto is the opposite of safety because it is the destructive energy that does not care about what makes us feel safe or secure. So with this combination, we tend to feel threatened in some way depending on the area of life, meaning the house that is involved. This is an optimal time for shadow work because we can now work on healing our emotional attachments to life in general. There can be an opportunity for transformation on an emotional level, and we can learn how to transform through non-attachment to the things that we believe define us and keep us safe. There might be a need to change our environment, such as our home. And this transition can also make it difficult for us to relax. We might not feel very safe in our homes, or we might know that we need to change or move our home. Changes with family, especially mother, can be affected, possibly mother's health, or our own personal health also can be involved. Also, we might be dealing with the loss of a family member, particularly mother. This combination could also bring pregnancy, or it can bring a challenge with a pregnancy if squares and opposition are involved. There could be the desire to separate from our family or our mother in particular. We could also suffer some health challenges, as I said before, and healing work can be very helpful with this combination. Pluto rules paranoia and suspicion, so that can even cause some kind of mental breakdown. There might be a feeling of intense love for another that borders on unhealthy dependency. And we could also have an intense love affair with this combination. Pluto can bring love, but it tends to be more extreme. So there could be power struggles, abuse, jealousy, or the desire to control another, or we are controlled by someone else. We can attract a possessive partner or want to possess our partners. There can also be some kind of secret that gets revealed with this transit. Maybe this can ignite our relationships with a controlling mother who wants to dominate. We might feel disempowered in some way with this transit. And as I said before, shadow work would be very helpful with this transit. Transiting Pluto in contact with our Mercury. This transit can transform us on a mental level. It helps our minds to focus on our passions and our interests. And there might be a deep and intense desire to learn, research, investigate, whatever we feel passionate about. And Pluto helps us to be able to become more analytical in whatever information that we are interested in. We might suddenly be more curious and feel ready to explore new ideas. There might be this deep and profound interest in occult or esoteric topics, also health-related topics. Anything that deals with mental health or psychology can also be an interest. Also, any kind of energy work or working on healing our emotions, such as shadow work. So this is a fantastic time for shadow work. This is an ideal time for exploring our spiritual interests. So this is a great combination for healing with our hands because Mercury rules the hands. And any kind of energy work such as acupuncture, Reiki, acupressure, those are all methods that could be helpful during this period of time. The downside to this transit might be that because Mercury is the mind, there might be some paranoia or feeling overly suspicious, maybe even anxious or fearful. These thoughts could be plaguing us. Suddenly we are afraid of the unknown. So we must be mindful of this combination because it can cause psychosis. However, keep in mind that there must also be other indications in the natal chart for any type of mental breakdown to be activated. But this is a great time to dig deep and to become the observer of our repetitive thoughts and to expose them through new lens, which will be Pluto allowing us to transform. We can witness how we feel triggered emotionally and then to break through our unconscious mental patterns. Transiting Pluto in contact with Venus. This will inspire or ignite our passions or desires for something that we want. Sometimes this is even something that, or someone that we want to possess. And this transit can bring us a transformative relationship, either one that is loving and deep or intense and volatile. Strong sexual attractions and addictions can come to the surface with this transit, but also the desire to possess another can become heightened because these desires are ready to be transformed on some level. Our values can change in general, but also our values in our relationship can definitely be transformed at this time. This is a great time to reinvent ourselves, our sense of style, our appearance can get transformed with this transit. Our attachments to our emotional needs can also get transformed through shadow work. This is an extremely emotional period since Venus rules our emotions, and they might get heightened. And shadow work helps us to work with these heightened emotions and allow us to explore them in a way that we may not have had until this transit gave us the potential to explore this and transform our emotional wounds. Now, Pluto will intensify our desire for pleasures, comforts, sex. We might also want to experience love and beautiful things and the pleasures of life and things that we find joyful. This could also open up our creative side, and we could experience art in a new way. We will might have the desire for luxury and just want to listen to beautiful music and go to parties, and this might become a period, a strong period for our desires to grow for pleasures. We might also attract or spend extreme amounts of money to experience these pleasures. So this is a great time to allow Pluto to teach us what needs healing through the process of shadow work. And it can be particularly helpful and effective during this window of time. Transiting Pluto in contact with Mars. This is a very intense and explosive combination. Mars is our personal will, which is the little brother of Pluto, who is divine will and is the big brother. We may have an extreme desire to commit to something, and we'll have the perseverance necessary to see it through. And it also will activate our passionate desires. This is a great time for sports because we can feel more empowered physically. Our internal power can get activated, so we might feel even more competitive. But at the same time, we have to be careful of the potential for accidents, because this Mars and Pluto together can create or cause accidents. This is a great time for energy work of all kinds, such as acupuncture, acupressure, or Reiki, and especially shadow work. Pluto squaring or opposing Mars, we need to take extreme caution because there could be some risks involved. So it's important that we don't take unnecessary risks. This combination can cause some kind of accident or crisis or something violent during this window of time. Also, this might cause power struggles or conflicts or intense competition on an internal or external level. We need to master this intense energy flow so that we can use it in a constructive way, give birth to something that we want to materialize, because Mars allows us to act and Pluto helps us to transform whatever we're willing to act on. So if we harness this potential constructively, we can use this and apply it to our business ideas and engagements in having an effective and strategic influence during this period of time. And this combination can give you the competitive edge. Transiting Pluto in contact with Jupiter. This combination can allow for expansion or growth, and this might be felt as an extreme desire to grow or expand in some area of life, but also Pluto is destructive, so we may want to destroy something that we have built. Pluto and Jupiter might have us asking the question, what does it mean to be successful? This transit can transform our definition of what this might mean for us. With squares and oppositions, we might be more destructive in how we behave, how we regard ourselves as far as being more successful. And with trines and sextiles, we might do this in a gentler way. However, the focus will be on our success and what this means for us. Our personal values as well as our social values might shift or transform in some way. And this could also have some sort of social impact on others based on our beliefs and values. In other words, we might have some influence on shaping society. Our passions and desire to succeed can definitely grow, and our goals might change, and this might even become more dogmatic. But This is with squares and oppositions, sometimes the conjunction. And our belief system tends to get transformed during this period of time, and it can be extreme in some cases. With Pluto, there might be some sort of death of an old for the renewed to be reborn. And this can be the phoenix rising through a rebirth and transformation in how we succeed and transform based on our belief system, based on our goals in life, and what it means for us to succeed. Transiting Pluto in contact with Saturn. If we can harness the power of Pluto, we can use this in constructive ways, but self-awareness is essential, and therefore shadow work would be very useful with this combination. Also, with this combination, we might be facing some type of internal limitation and boundaries that we feel. And because Saturn wants boundaries and limitations, but Pluto wants to blow this up in some way. So there might be that inner tension of trying to work through to constructively use this energy. This is a great time for public work or for leadership roles that are put you in a powerful position. But this is also can also bring challenges that is essential for transformation. We might be limiting ourselves in some way, and it's time to break down and break through these barriers in some way. This could be an inner stability that gets challenged because Saturn is the stability that we want to hold on into inside of ourselves. And there's some extreme change that happens to force us to transform on a very deep level. What was once established and rigid and held a certain position is no longer solid and stable because Pluto wants to break down those barriers that have held you rigid. And in order for this to happen, we need to do this in a conscious way so that transformation can happen at its most elevated level. And with all Pluto transits, shadow work is very useful while going through this process. So thank you for joining me. I hope you'll consider subscribing and liking if you enjoyed this video. Also, I want to remind you that I do offer personal natal chart readings and one-on-one shadow work, and you can send me an email at starwellastro@gmail.com. Thank you and goodbye.